Hello, everybody. I can see attendees starting to join the webinar. Might just give it a few more moments to give people a chance to join us. All right, we might make a start now. Hello and welcome to the second webinar in our 2021 series exploring the results and findings in phase 4 of the Audience Outlook Monitor research. My name is Lena Stein and I'm a research associate here at the Australia Council for the Arts. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the many nations throughout Australia that we're tuning in from and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to all First Nations people online and present in this session. So to provide some brief background, the Australia Council is very excited to be partnering with Patternmakers and Wolf Brown again in 2021 for a further 3 phases of the Audience Outlook Monitor tracking study. Throughout 2020, the data and insights from the Outlook Monitor research provided the arts and cultural sector with crucial insights to inform planning and decision-making in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. We and many of our state and territory colleagues were eager to support this important research again this year as the sector begins to recover and we navigate this phase of the pandemic. And I'd also like to say that recovery is certainly not a smooth road. We are still navigating a really challenging landscape, as we've seen in Perth over the last few days and in Brisbane a month ago when we last presented an Audience Outlook Monitor webinar. Things change rapidly, which is why it's so important to continue to track audience sentiment. So many of you in attendance today will be familiar with the Outlook Monitor webinars, but if this is your first, welcome. We're really happy to have you here. And if you'd like to rewatch or share the webinar following the session, a recording will be available on the Australia Council website shortly, and you can also find recordings of previous webinars there too. The discussion today will focus on the outlook for fundraising and support in 2021. You might remember a session on this topic was held last year, back in May 2020. So it's great to be able to see how the outlook has changed almost a year on. Many of you will also know our brilliant hosts for today's webinar, Tandi Palmer Williams, Managing Director of Patternmakers, and Matt Morse, Executive Director of Strategy and Programs at Creative Partnerships Australia. Before I hand over to Tandi and Matt, some quick housekeeping. If you would like to ask a question at any stage of the discussion, please feel free to write it in the Q&A box and we will try and answer as many of these as we can throughout the session. Please also use the chat box for any general comments, thoughts and ideas throughout the webinar or just to say hello. We'll be monitoring both of these thanks to Chris from the Australia Council and Bianca from Patternmakers who will be keeping an eye on these. I'd also like to thank and welcome Sean and Elisa, our wonderful Auslan interpreters, for being here with us today. Now over to you, Tandi and Matt.
All right, Matt, shall I kick off or will you?
I'm happy for you to kick off.
Okay, great.
I think, you know, it has been a year since we had our first session in regards to data, and I think it's really quite exciting that we've got that next iteration of that data that we can actually have a really good conversation about over the next 45 minutes. I think, you know, there's a lot of data out there in regards to fundraising efforts, how other charitable areas have been affected or are starting to bounce back in regards to support for charities across our country. And, you know, it's timely. And as we start to, what we say, you know, build back or continue to do what we do, but, you know, build up our cash reserves with our supporters, any piece of information that we can have helps us as fundraisers be more successful in what we do. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. Me too. It's certainly a special time, I think. We don't say unprecedented anymore, do we? But it is unprecedented. It's certainly a unique time in terms of the challenges we face, but also in terms of our engagement with audiences. So I'm really pleased to be here with all of you today and in conversation with you, Matt, to talk about what we know about audiences and their support for artists and cultural organisations from the Audience Outlook Monitor. I'm excited to get into it, but before we do, just want to give my acknowledgement to the Guringai country whose lands I'm on today, and I'd love to know more about who's out there in this webinar today. So if you want to introduce yourself in the chat so we can connect with you, and if you want to share what country you're on today, that would be fabulous. We do have a couple of polls actually to know more about you. So Lena, can we run those now? And while we're doing that, I'll continue chattering away. But the first one's just to find out about your role. So please complete that when you can. Just basically, before we get into it, I'm presenting this data on behalf of Patternmakers. I've got my colleague Bianca, who's going to be joining you in the chat and sharing some links where relevant, and Wolf Brown, our international research partner in this project. And really all of us at Patternmakers and Wolf Brown, we just want to say thank you for inviting us to work with you in this way through this time. And it's an incredible honour to be leading this study. And thank you to all of our participating organisations. We have over 120 who every 4 months of this year will be surveying their audiences, and we then aggregate all of the data that's collected into a dashboard. And that helps us build this incredible picture of audiences, unlike anything we've ever seen before in the Australian arts sector. And it means we can look at different trends across art forms, across different states and territories, and hone in on insights that we wouldn't possibly be able to see in any single kind of database study. So thanks for completing that first poll. We've also got a second one about how fundraising and support is going at your organisation if you're in a fundraising role. We're curious about, since the onset of the pandemic, how your fundraising is tracking relative to kind of pre-pandemic time. So if you can give us a sense of that, I think that will provide some good food for thought today. Or if you're not in a fundraising if you're not in an arts organisation that does fundraising, you can just hit not applicable and we'll carry on. So just a quick note to mention that the data we're talking about today is collected from audiences, so people who attend arts and cultural events, from everything from museums, gallery exhibitions, literary events, festivals, concerts, performances, talks, workshops, all that kind of thing, across all different art forms. But the findings aren't applicable to kind of the general population, so we just need to bear that in mind. So let's show the results now, if we can, Lena, from those polls. All right, so surprise, surprise. Most commonly, you are from fundraising and development within a cultural organisation today. We also have some executive and management roles, marketing and comms, and some fundraising consultants and other.
Great mix.
And then let's see how fundraising is tracking for those who are in. Interesting. So 23% say it's okay. So for half of us, this question isn't applicable, but for those who have answered it, people most commonly say about the same. We've got some who are saying slightly higher than before the pandemic. That's the second top answer. And then 2 people each saying much higher or slightly lower or much lower. So a good, interesting spread there. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And since we've got so many people in fundraising roles with us today, can I ask you please to use the chat to share your observations and insights, because that's the benefit of us all coming together in this way, being here for the next 45 minutes, is that we can learn from each other. So please don't hesitate to offer your experience or what you're observing, and of course your questions. So shall I get into it, Matt? Anything else to say?
Well, actually, I thought I'd bring some data from outside of...
Oh, please, yes.
Just to provide a little bit of context. So I contacted our good friends at JB Weir, and they run a giving report from the NAB Charitable Giving Index. And this measures charitable giving over the months of the year. So in February 2020, which was when Australians were being really generous, we had just been through the bushfires and also the floods there. Charitable giving in that month was hitting around $2.3 billion. And as we went through, the first phase of the pandemic, right up to December of 2020, we saw a steep decline in giving. And at its lowest point, it was around $1.9 billion for that month of December. So quite a sharp drop there. But it's what we're seeing now is a slight bounce back. So I think what we're seeing is we're coming through the worst of people supporting charitable organisations, and we're on the way bouncing back. And when looking at arts, culture, and recreation, because they're all bundled in together, unfortunately, with this piece of research, there was a significant decline. And hitting around $130 million for the month of February in 2020, and then decreasing down to $72 million in December of 2020. So that's quite a significant drop there. But I do, and from sources and people that I've been speaking to that are seeing new data, we're starting to see that increase back. But it's also great to look at, with the audience that we've got here today, that we're seeing some organisations that are being more successful in raising funds. We're seeing organisations that are tracking quite well against the year prior. So I think, data is one thing, but, it's great to see some optimism in that first piece of the question that we put to the team.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. It's great to have that bigger picture. And certainly we know from our data collection throughout 2020 that people's concerns about the economy were really quite high towards the middle and spring of last year. So we know that people in sizable numbers were experiencing loss of work, loss of income, financial hardship, and were quite concerned about the overall economic outlook. And over the summer, that's actually shifted somewhat, and there is a bit more confidence in the market, and certainly people aren't as worried about, say, a long-lasting recession as they were in 2020. So that's kind of interesting to think about. I want to get in to show us some data from the Audience Outlook Monitor, which was collected at the beginning of March. So basically what we found when we compared the March results to previous data collection in May of last year, so the early stages of the pandemic, what we found is that 9 in 10 audiences continue to say that they're committed to supporting artists and organisations they think are important. And the level of people who say they're strongly committed has even increased slightly. And you can see here in this chart, in the top row, we see all audiences. So we know about 44% of audiences responding to this survey said that they're strongly committed, 51% said moderately committed, and a small number said not committed. But we can see as we go down the page that based on the frequency with which someone attends, that changes quite dramatically. So among our frequent and loyal attendees, we know that more like 3/4 are actually feel strongly committed, whereas if people are attending, once or twice a year, that drops more towards moderate levels of commitment or not being committed, as we would kind of expect. What's actually been interesting to monitor is the level of donorship, so the proportion of audiences who are donating to an artist or a cultural cause. And what we know is that basically the proportion of people in May was 28%. In March of this year, it's 29%. And we're not yet at the end of the financial year yet. So it's likely that that proportion will increase when we collect data again in early July, so that at that point we'll have a good picture of the whole financial year. But compared to pre-pandemic times, it was 19%. So we know that donorship among audiences has been higher in the years affected by COVID-19, and that's why this is a bit of a special time. Obviously, we're looking at a picture of audiences, so we don't know, a picture of all donors to an organisation and what the level of those gifts are or level of donations. Out there, 59% of audiences haven't donated in recent years. And we'll talk about this again in a little while, but it's interesting to note that among that 59%, around half say they're likely to in future and half say that they're unlikely to in future. So there's quite a sizable number who haven't donated recently but say they're likely to in future. And it's an interesting group to think about as we, craft our campaigns and messages, is how to get people across the line. And I've got some ideas about that later that I'm keen to share with you. But I'd love to know if these figures resonate with you, what questions you've got, and hopefully we can have a good chat about this in a moment. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, well, Tandi, I think as a fundraiser working in an arts organisation, if I had a sentiment that 29% of people participating either as an audience member or as a visitor to my organisation, that's a really nice benchmark to be working towards when thinking about, well, what level of support or how we are going to message what we do to enable people to support what we do. So I think it's quite promising. I think a 1% increase up to now, that's great. And as we come towards the end of the financial year, and as arts organisations, we go into our end of financial year campaigns with our strong cases for support. Hopefully we'll be lending a little bit more away from the impact of COVID-19 on our organisations and reverting to, the great work and the impact that we have with what we do. We'll continue to see that grow.
Interesting. I love what you've picked up on there, and I want to come back to that in a moment. So just to carry on and share some with you now, some of the qualitative data. So when we ask people who have donated recently what prompted them to donate, we hear things like this: artists and cultural organisations are vitally important and they are doing it tough at the moment. I do not want some of the artists and cultural organisations I support to fail due to lack of support, and my respect and love and need for what they do, the challenges they face making a living, let alone post-pandemic, and my hope that they will always do what they do and continue making the world a better place. So you can get a sense there of some of the reasons that audiences are passionate about supporting artists and cultural organisations right now. One of the key themes is to support particularly artists who are experiencing hardship. So that's a key message that we can be conscious of in terms of our campaigns at the moment. And it is very compelling for audiences, particularly those who attend frequently. One thing to note is that whilst many people feel supportive, not everyone is showing their support financially. And some people say things like, I'm interested in supporting them, but I'm not in a position to do so financially. Or supporting the arts can be a significant cost when attending events, let alone when there is nothing to attend. And during these uncertain times, I would like to provide support where I can and in return for some sort of service or product. So I think this is kind of opening the door for a conversation as audiences show their support. Some are very accustomed to reaching into their pockets and making a donation. Other people are open to doing it in different ways, and I'd love to kind of dig into some of the data on this now.
Can I just add one thing there? For me, being, as an executive, I go, I'm happy if they want to buy a ticket or if they want to buy a membership or if they want to buy a ticket and donate. It's income for our organisation. So it is great to know that there is some people out there that are doing as much as they can, even though they want different things. So.
Absolutely. So let's now look at some of the trends in donations. And if we've got time, I might jump into the dashboard and do some cross analysis with you today. So one interesting trend is age. So we know that audiences of all ages feel supportive, but older audiences are most likely to donate. So the proportion who are donating increases with age, such that once it gets to kind of the 65 plus age range, it is quite common. And I'll dig into the dashboard into this a little bit more if it's interesting to you. So let me know if you want to come back to something like this. One thing we ask people is how likely they are to participate in different forms of support. And we asked the same question in May last year and again in March this year. And we found that some things are pretty much stable. So the likelihood to donate to an artist or organisation they care about, 68% bang on again, you'll see on the left. As in the past, 2/3 of audiences say they're likely to donate, and now we know some of those are and some of those aren't. So that's to bear in mind. But as we look across the page, we'll see that some of these results have changed during the pandemic. So on the right-hand side, the biggest change is in paying for digital programs. So in March, we can see that this result has fallen, and that's in line with broader trends around falling participation online. So sizable numbers still continue to participate online, but it has dropped somewhat, and particularly in those states where more events are now happening physically and in person, we're seeing that. And there is an element of screen fatigue as well out there. So some people want to minimize their screen time right now, and some people just say, you know, digital programs aren't for me. Some people love them and will continue to participate in them long term, but that's an interesting kind of trend to think about in relation to our fundraising campaigns. Buying merchandise, interestingly, this is a very age sensitive one. Young people love merch and older people don't love merch, but it's interesting that that has fallen very slightly. One of the things that has increased is the likelihood to purchase a subscription or a membership. And we're seeing some qualitative data on this as well. And I mentioned in the last webinar that we did that I think subscriptions and memberships could have a bit of a moment in the next few months. And looking into 2022, what we can see is that and we do have a very strong performing arts subscriber base who are participating in this study, but the rate of people who are buying subscriptions and memberships isn't yet this year in 2021. It's still slightly lower than it was, you know, at the beginning of 2020, pre-pandemic. But it's pretty strong, I'd say, for a year like the one we've had. And what's interesting is that the optimism about renewing next year has jumped quite dramatically since September. So 90% of people who are subscribers say they plan to renew for next year. So I think that is looking quite strong. And some people are seeing subscriptions as a way to show their support whilst getting a benefit, and they're kind of seeing it as a way that whilst buying a single ticket right now for a show has an element of risk in terms of that date being affected by a border closure, cancellation, that kind of thing, whereas a subscription is going to run the entire year and people feel like they'll get the value from it one way or another across the year. So that's something interesting to keep an eye on. Now, coming into kind of the post-pandemic, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the fact that audiences see a really strong role for arts and culture in our communities, assisting with recovery. And we did some analysis of this in spring of last year, analysing audience responses to the question, and I'll just jump over the page. What role can arts and culture organisations play in your community to assist with recovery from the pandemic? And we visualised a whole bunch of quotes. We actually heard some really beautiful things about the ideas people have for arts in their community and the role that they see it playing and why they see it as being of value in these particular times. And Bianca can share a link so you can explore some of those, that data if you'd like to. But the key themes that people pick up on, and I think these are interesting themes in terms of thinking about our campaigns and our work in relation to what audiences, what's resonating at the moment. So, and these are the themes. So place, reanimating public places and community spaces, connect, bringing people together after isolation, escape, so letting us forget our problems and inhabit other worlds, heal, processing the pandemic and grieving for what has been lost, transform, helping us grow and progress as a society and remodel, so rethinking the way arts and culture work. So whilst audiences are very struck by kind of financial hardship and artists who are struggling, they're also really passionate about helping artists and cultural organisations play a role in our community in these different ways. Matt, any surprises here for you, or what kind of resonates most?
I must say, I'm not surprised. I think what this kind of reminds me of is my first experience back at a live performance after the Melbourne lockdown. And there was that sense of how amazing arts and creativity is, that sense of love for the performers that were performing in front of us, because they were back on stage for the first time after not knowing what was going to happen to them. And it was just this kind of explosion of, this is why we need arts and culture, and this is why it's important for us to be here. And so I'm not surprised. And I think, escapism and connectivity is massive at the moment. We want to be connecting with people. And as we get more confident, as we attend more things and things become a little bit more stable, we're going to be more adventurous as well. But I don't think we'll ever forget that moment when culture came back, taken away from us. So I think that's something we want to kind of be championing and using this moment at this moment in time to really, that message alive.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd be interested for those participating, what you see among your network and in terms of your audiences, what ideas you're playing with. But I think someone said to me recently that they're sensing a bit of fatigue with talking about, COVID-19 or the virus, rather than using those words and dwelling on those things, trying to pick up on some of these more future-focused ideas. One interesting thing that some broader Australian population research has picked up on is that many people see that a priority for them is increasing their well-being, their personal well-being, their financial well-being, their there's different ways to think about well-being, but it's definitely a priority for some people. So some interesting ideas there in terms of messaging in terms of our campaigns and knowing what might resonate with audiences more in future.
I'll add to that. I'm a very different person to what I was 12 months ago when we were sitting here. I think, the impact of the virus on the way in which I lived and how I chose to live. And I think, that's very important to how I live my life coming out of that. So I completely agree with that sentiment for the greater population.
So one thing to note is that whilst the donorship rates are up in terms of audiences, there are signs that they may not last forever. So there's two ideas I want to pick up on here. So these are two quotes I pulled out. One person said, "There are so many organisations of all types that deserve support. Given our income will decline over the next year," this is their personal situation, "donations we make will be based on those we feel are most in need." And my three friends and I had already paid for our subscriptions and opted to donate the ticket costs when their performances were cancelled. So two things I want to pick up on. One is that the relationship of donations to paying for tickets. And I think that as more ticketed events come online and ticket sales start to increase, we may see donations be affected. And that people are identifying so much with those in need that how we craft messages around need and hardship will affect also, the audience, what's compelling to audience as well. So I think that's just kind of two things to be conscious of. And I think it's likely that, we need to be planning for an uncertain future. We know things are really kind of tough at the moment, but I think trying to think about how we look after and continue to build relationships with those who have donated to last through into post-pandemic times is a good thing to be thinking about.
Yeah. And just to add on that, Tandi, I think even if people did support you during the pandemic, that they would not normally support you because they may not have those means, or their future circumstances may change. What you now have is a greater indication of their level of respect and for what you do in your arts practice. So it's about relationships and keeping great relationships with those people. And it may be that something in 5 years' time might be that they might be able to support you with, or that they might be able to do other things with you. So don't lose sight of the people that have stepped up during the pandemic to say, I love what you do, you're really important to me. So, keep them, don't drop them off. You're just looking at the dollars.
Yeah.
It is all about relationships. So
yeah, I think what we've seen during the pandemic is more awareness than ever before of kind of some of the realities of, income for artists and what it takes to, survive financially as an organisation as well. So we've got better understanding among the general public of the arts as an important cause. And I think through the pandemic, so many of us have relied on creative outputs and experiences, and we know more than ever now that that's important to having a meaningful and enjoyable life. And so many people have been just itching to get back to live events, and devastated when things are cancelled. So we're kind of on the public consciousness more than ever before, and so I think it's a kind of my feeling is let's make hay while the sun shines in a way, and try and build and consolidate on that in future as many ways as we can. So what I thought I might do is just identify the 3 key audience segments that we can see in this data. So basically the segments split out as follows. So about 41% are the segment I call dedicated and donating. So these are people who have donated in recent years. What we know about this segment is that they are most commonly attending quite frequently, so a few times a month. And they're most likely to do things like making a donation to a specific cause that they care about, or donating the value of tickets. So they are frequent attendees and very likely to do that. They're the least likely segment to buy merchandise. And potential messages that could work with this segment are things like, help us to play a role in community recovery in this way, kind of thing. The second segment is what I call committed but constrained. So this is about 30% of the sample, and they're most commonly attending slightly less often, so about once a month, although you've got people of all attendance frequencies in all of these segments. But they're most likely to, again, donate to a specific cause or share messages of support. So they're open to things like raising awareness or being asked to help, share content or help promote an event, those kinds of things. So I think it's always good to be thinking about, for this segment, what are the ways that someone can help us or show support if they aren't in a position to donate. And a big chunk of this group are open to donating and say they're likely to donate but struggle to actually make it happen. So it's thinking about how we can, be top of mind and make those reminders where appropriate and help them to get across the line. They're the least likely segment to pay, say they'll pay for access for digital programs right now. And potential messages that are likely to resonate with this group are things like your donate help support an artist experiencing hardship, that kind of thing. The last segment is 29% of the sample. And I will just mention that due to the likelihood that, audience engagement does play into the response rate of this survey, we are likely to see that the dedicated and donating segment slightly overrepresented in our sample. And this last segment, supportive savers, there's likely to be quite a number more people like that out there. But in our sample at 29%, they most commonly attend kind of a couple of times a year or every now and again. They're most likely to do things like buy ticket vouchers for the future. or share messages of support, and they're actually least likely to make a donation to a specific cause. So potential messages that could work with this segment is, buy in advance and you'll not only save money, but you'll be enabling us to do X. So they're open to showing their support where they're also getting kind of a benefit. So there are 3 segments to think about in relation to our campaigns, and it's good to think about what's our offer or our ask in relation to each of those. And we're coming to some tips. So based on what we've talked about today, I thought I'd share some of my tips. So number 1 is that now is the time to ask for support if you're experiencing hardship or facing financial difficulties. So don't wait. Audiences are primed and passionate about this now, and it might not last forever. So number 2 is that personal specific campaigns related to artists are the most compelling to many audiences right now. And, they're obviously important for us as a sector because they're going to help us get funds to artists and where they're needed most and help people get back to work. The third is that when planning for future programs and campaigns, it's might be helpful to link your work to some of the themes that we talked about around, transformation, healing, place, that kind of thing. So, and if you're keen to explore ideas on that, you can check out the Visions for Culture website link, which Bianca posted a bit earlier. And tailoring campaigns is always a good idea. And, we've all got different levels of capacity in this area. So it's really, case by case basis, what works for you and what you've got capacity for. But age and frequency are good ways to segment audiences. And so if in your database you've got any of those details, you can use those as a starting point for tailored messaging, tailored campaigns. Number 5 is that, as we've talked about, levels of support might not last forever. So it's important to plan now for the stewardship of new and repeat donors to into the future and think about those pathways over time. And I just was having to think about the 30% of audiences who haven't donated but say they're likely to, and looking at kind of some approaches from behavioural insights, which some of you will be familiar with. So I think it could be a time to experiment with things like social norms. So that's where you say, 30% of audiences have made a donation this year. Is there a cause you're passionate about? And those kinds of things. So we know based on past studies internationally that, stating what other people do or the percentage of people in the population who do something can help nudge people in the right direction. And there's some interesting other approaches around behavioural insights. If you're interested, I can share some links on those afterwards. But they're my tips. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, no, I agree with number 6. I think, that 30% of audiences that haven't donated yet, if you've got the capacity and you've got some time as a bit of an experimental project, I definitely would. But I do understand. I think we're all a little bit busy. Going back to tailoring, if you can segment, frequency is always a good place to start. There's people that do attend more. They're more likely to either give or be able to extend their gift to make it larger over time. But age is a really interesting part. If we go back to the beginning of this research paper that we've been discussing today, and their likeliness to give, that's also a very good place to start. And of course, stewardship. As fundraisers, we should always be thinking about stewardship and thinking about how do we get people from here to here, and what will that take for us to get people there. I feel like a broken record, but yeah, relationships and understanding the people that are supporting you. They're your 2 greatest assets there. So
yeah, I was just on the phone with one donor yesterday who was talking about a fabulous recent event they attended, which they thought was going to be linked with an ask for donations. And I was like, they were looking for a donation slip everywhere and they couldn't find one. And she was like, I was ready to give money. But anyway, there's always those missed opportunities. And if we had all the time in the world, we could make the most of them. But there's some ideas. I think basically just want to share a message of congratulations to everyone who is fundraising at the moment. I think it's an extraordinary time, and to get donorship up to the levels that we're seeing is obviously a mammoth effort from fundraisers right across the sector. So absolute amazing work to everyone who's busy with campaigns at the moment and planning for end of financial year. I thought since we've got a few minutes left that I might show you the dashboard. Is that, have you got time, Matt, to stay with us another couple of minutes?
This is the exciting part.
So obviously the dashboard is freely available for everyone to use, and I'll show it on screen now. So I've just jumped into the dashboard and I'm in the support and fundraising report. So this dashboard is accessible from either Patternmakers website or the Australia Council website, and you do need to log in, but it's, there's a standard login you can use, so anyone can access this. And I am basically applying the age filter here, you can click from any number of filters to explore the data. If you're curious about a breakdown now, pop that idea in the chat and we can have a look for you. But I just thought I'd show you the results by age. So when we look at how personally committed people are to supporting arts and cultural organisations that are important to them, broken down by age, what we see is this, and this is the results on the left in May, and on the right we've got March 2021. And so you can see that across the bottom for different age groups, there's not any real age-related trends there. So people of all ages feel, moderately committed, strongly committed in even numbers. So we're not seeing any particular interesting trends. People of all ages are committed. But when we look at how likely or unlikely are you to do each of the following, we see some very clear age-related trends. So here you can see patterns going in different directions. So I thought I'd just highlight some of those to you now. So where we look at subscriptions and memberships, they're highly age sensitive, as you might expect. Older people are much more likely to buy a subscription. Also doing things like donating the value of unused tickets. Roughly making a donation, people of all ages say they're likely to do that, but we know from the stats that I've already shown you that older people are actually doing that in higher numbers. When it comes to buying ticket vouchers, that's much more a young person's thing, something that young people are more open to and interested in than older people. And things like sharing words of support or raising awareness on social media, again, young people are really into that relative to older people. Digital programs, again, younger people are participating in those things more often. And as I've said, merchandise. So this is, again, something that younger people are much more interested in than older people. So some really interesting age-related trends there in terms of the forms of support that audiences are likely to participate in. And again, I'll just show you this donation data in a different way, but we've seen here, as age increases, we're seeing the likelihood to donate increase. And interestingly, it's not necessarily about income level. So we might think, older audiences are more likely to donate because they're, better off. But it's not the case, actually, when we look at income level. And warning, I'm going to show you some pretty scary looking charts right now, but bear with me, I'll talk you through it. When we look at income level, what we can see is that, so this is splitting the data by applying two filters. So it's age and income level. So when we look at the 75 plus age group, we can see that even among older age groups, sorry, this is this one, in 75 plus, around 40%, even in lower income brackets. So older people on lower incomes are still relatively likely to donate. So 40% of people are donating even on that very lowest income level bracket. And it's quite high even among all income brackets in that age group. Whereas when we look at the under 35 age group, we can see that across all income levels, likelihood to donate is smaller than people. So we know that older people on small incomes are more likely to donate than younger people on high incomes. So that's just something interesting to show you. Matt, is there any other data cuts that you'd be curious about to see?
No, not at the moment, because I'm just conscious of the time. But I would just like to say to our audience that are joining us that if you are working in fundraising, you should be diving into this piece of research and doing some analysis based on some assumptions that you're making for your audience within your organisation. I think because, as we always rant on about, but this can help you try and prove some concepts that you can take to your executive, or if you're talking to people, your board or your trustees and so forth. This is great dynamic data that's going to help support some of your decision making. So, and it's current. So.
Yes, absolutely. We're seeing lots of people do things like using this data in board reports and updates, or building the case for investment in certain areas. So if we can assist you with that, just yell out. And we're also inviting you to actually share examples of how you're using data and what you're learning from actual practice in your organisation. So if you have any insights from action at your organisation, we are collating those, and we're aiming to build a resource of practical tips and tricks. So we're running a bit of a comp throughout the rest of the year, and we'll be doing a prize draw. So we've had some great entries already, but if you have an insight to share from your experience, we'd love to hear from you. Head to the link. Bianca can share a link to that, or in our website you'll find a link to that as well. We've got some prizes to give away, like cash gift cards. You can win a research briefing or a consultation with the Australia Council's research team, which I think is a pretty good prize. Of course, on our website there's a whole bunch of resources, and if there's any questions you have, feel free to contact us at any point.
And just to add again, to anyone that's joining here today, Creative Partnerships Australia, we're a government agency, and we're here to support arts organisations and artists to increase their ability to fundraise better to support their activities. So we do have a great load of resources around fundraising on our website, but we also have a great resource, which is our state managers. So in all states and territories around the country, we have a dedicated person that can support you, answer any questions that you have around your fundraising campaigns or your strategies, that can help support you do what you do. So connect with us as well, and use this data. I can't say it too many times. Use it. So.
Thank you so much, Tandi and Matt, for that fantastic discussion, and to everyone for being here today. It's really great to see the engagement. And further fact sheets and webinars on different audience outlook monitor topics will be coming up in the next few months. These webinars are scheduled for the last Tuesday of each month, and the schedule can be found on the Australia Council website. Next month's webinar will be focused on digital engagement, and it'll be on the 25th of May. And I'll just pop a link to register for that as well in the chat if you'd like to attend. And again, if you'd like to rewatch or share today's webinar, a recording will be available on the Australia Council website and our YouTube channel soon. Thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are tuning in from, and we will see you again in May. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later.